Well, here we are, Renee, another episode. We're just rolling along and another interview. Tell us more.
I'm excited to be here. This is another one of Jason's friends. He's met out on the campaign circuit. Here I am giving
Campaign.
you a
What am I running
politician.
for?
Wow. No, on the training circuit when he's at all the different conferences he's at. And I haven't got to meet Jerry this morning. So Jerry is a pharmacist. He's going to come to us from a very different perspective, talking about some of the healthcare issues that he's seen along the way. And then he's in the middle of working with leadership and have some exciting ideas about leadership and coaching in that realm. So excited to meet him and have this conversation. But before we kick that off, Jason, what is happening on the farm here in October?
Well, I just don't go meet people when I'm on the conference tour. I have people that come to me. And so my machine shed was full of people, earlier last month. And Southern rust has been really difficult this year, Renee. Do you know how bad Southern rust is?
I don't even know what Southern Rust is, Jason.
Day. So our plants molded. So all through those
Oh,
months of August and September, when we had all that rain every day, this
yes.
happens down south a lot. They deal with rust every
Oh,
year. We don't have that type of pressure, disease pressure on our crops, and so we're taking a real hit this year. And so it's really affected harvest and how our plants stand and how we dry and don't dry because those ears of corn never fully developed. And so I'm complaining about rain, Renee. We had too much rain this year, and I know
which
there's been
for
many
our
years I said it
listeners,
needs to
for
rain
the
more.
listeners who are following, Jason last month was not ever going to complain about the rain because you enjoyed how much he had. And now here we are in the full circle moment of a farmer. We are now
Yep,
complaining about the very thing we weren't complaining about last month.
exactly right.
All right, just making sure we keep it all up. So, Jerry, please kick us off and explain to our listening audience who you are and welcome to the show. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, so excited for this conversation. Yeah, a little bit about me. I am a pharmacist. I've been one for 20 years. Can't believe that crossed the 2-0 barrier this past June. But along the way, I discovered leadership development, and that's actually what saved my career after a rough patch between getting fired and then also dealing with a shady boss where I was filling crooked scripts while he was writing me bad checks. And so in all that, I realized I had to do something different and somehow had the opportunity to help facilitate some leadership material for a pharmacy leadership nonprofit called Pharmacy Leadership Education Institute, plei.org. And teaching leadership somehow changed my view of what I could become, who I could become as a leader. And so that leadership experience, when I decided to get the confidence to take on leadership positions, that's what opened more doors. But these jobs were like icebergs. I would hop from one to another, and they would melt after a year, and then hop to another. And then I decided that after enough iceberg hopping, that I wanted to just focus more on people development because that's what really energized me. And the paradox with that is that actually is what prepared me for my pharmacy manager positions. And because you have to be able to coach people both, internally on your team, but also patients, right? And so you have a more, I'd say, effective approach when it comes to motivating people to not just do what you want because that's manipulation, but just to realize, hey, there's a shared benefit in what I'm trying to present to you. And whether it is in difficult populations where they need some level of autonomy because you can't reach them, right? Like rural populations, it's like, well, we're going to have to trust that they're going to do what they need. And so I'm seeing this intersection. That's how Jason and I got to meet because I realized that the real topic of my presentation, which was 5 ways to help overcome noncompliance with patients, is really
Mhm.
how to incorporate coaching into your healthcare leadership style. And so that's and God, Jason was kind enough to sit in on my presentation after I sat in on his, and here we are, ready to have a conversation for the masses.
Yeah, and I think that was the part I really loved about your presentation, Jerry, is really thinking about how can we do a better job as healthcare professionals. It doesn't matter if you're a therapist, a peer coach, a primary care physician, a dentist. How do we coach our patients better? Because I think that's a key element that's so oftentimes missing. And so, how can we better? Because I think it's a great way to talk about it. I think people are more disarmed. They're willing to talk about coaching differently than they are their bedside manner or patient management. We hear all of these different words. And so tell us a little more about coaching and how you bridge that gap.
Yeah, yeah. Part of this is helping practitioners realize that they don't need to be the superhero every single time. we go in wanting to be the hero. We put on our cape and we want to go rescue a broken system and broken patients until you hit that inevitable wall of burnout and you realize that you can't do it all yourself, even though the healthcare culture has this grit mentality. You hear all the time about what kind of nonsense the residents have to go through on their in their first year as interns. And on one hand, you do want to make sure people get some thick skin and they toughen up a little bit. And at the same time, the body can only do so much and it can only handle so much. So what does it take? Because when you're tired, I don't want a tired doctor working on me. I don't want a tired pharmacist, checking my scripts. I want to make sure that we do more to help practitioners and providers give sustainably. And
Yep.
sustainably means more rest and recovery and taking more off their plate. And a big part of being able to help them do less work is to use coaching so they can empower others to do the work for them. Not because they're passing the buck, but they're helping grow their people in terms of critical thinking and processing and trusting them with that level of autonomy now that we've helped coach
Yeah.
them up properly.
Well, and I think about how oftentimes do we not recognize the burnout in our own patients. I mean, patients are burned out
Hmm.
too. They're
Hmm.
burned out from navigating the system, or they're burned out from their
Hmm.
family situations. And I think it's just really good when we can recognize the burnout all around us, and how do we best support folks to reach their best, no matter which role they are in that scenario. And I think that's the interesting way to look at this differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And to dovetail on that, right? As you said, you have a heart for the rural population and making sure they are taken care of just like any other person that has more accessible healthcare, whether it's facilities or providers or things like this. And so, yeah, how do we make sure that with all the equipment that they're doing and dealing with rust and all these other
Right.
factors beyond their regular control, that they are actually still finding a way to manage themselves well with just enough help from practitioners, whether through telehealth or otherwise.
Yep. So one of the things I've been learning about myself, I'm one of those eldest daughter responsible type people. And that got
Hmm.
me into being a therapist and got me into politics. It got me into lots of things. And one of the things I've had to learn is that helping others be responsible is actually me being responsible. So rather than me having to do it all for them, making other people do their part, right? And making sure that teaching them to be responsible for themselves and for their
Mhm.
people that they have, rather than me doing it for everybody. And that was a really long lesson. And to your point, that leads straight to burnout. And a lot of us in this helping profession, we get in here because we are responsible people. We want to help people. We want to do good. We wouldn't do this job for others. I just saw somebody post something about, should I go to a therapist? Is it worth the money? Or are they just getting paid? Nobody does that job for the money. I mean, nobody is a pharmacist straight up for the money. I mean, it's like, what are we talking about? We don't get paid like these big dollars to do these helping professions, right? And
Mhm.
so, but other people outside don't understand that. They think somehow we're making all the big bucks and we're doing this for alternative motives. And maybe if you're a very specific specialist in specific specialty fields, you might get paid that high dollar, but you have to be very niche and very specific. But generally, all of us in the helping healthcare, that's not who we are. So helping us. So talk about that, Jerry. How do you help the professional? So you were talking about how you moved up in your leadership. How do you help the professional figure out what they're actually responsible for versus taking on all that extra burden that burns them out? How do you do that?
Yeah, as one book I read said, they said the least utilized resource is the patient. And when you want the patient to have a higher quality of life, that means part of this is making the case that, hey, you don't want a helicopter parent. You don't want me intervening every single time and holding your hand through everything. That's not a high quality of life. With the vision I have for you as the patient coaching this practitioner is just to communicate this vision to them to say, hey, look, part of this is my willingness and your trust that in working myself out of a job and helping you stand on your own 2 feet, that you're going to be able to manage your own disease states. You're going to be able to manage your own diabetes well. You're going to be able to manage your own dialysis well. And here's the benefit to that. Now your relationships are richer. Now you have a longer opportunity to enjoy these relationships and do your work well. And don't you want these things? And that's Carnegie being like, well, you have to say yes to that answer, right? You have to answer that question, yes. And then, so again, this is very much a win-win, as Stephen Covey says, right? Think win-win every single time. Hey, the win is that you can stand on your own 2 feet without my help. The win for me is that I can rest, recover, and then move on to the next patient. And I can then grow and train and send off. But yeah, and I part of that is explain that to the provider. Hey, do you like being burnt out? Well, no. So let's help your patients in a way so that you don't get burnt out over the long term. And I think that's where I'd start when it comes to coaching practitioners to realize, hey, yeah, help them. And it's not in the way that you were originally trained to help them, because that's a short-term gain, not a long-term one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good transition to talk about a little bit of data. I mean, because how
Mhm.
do we get to that place of overwhelm? And so, I did a
Mhm.
quick, search of some NIH, National Institute of Health studies, and we see thousands of research articles. And pretty much across the board, we look at long-term medication therapies, and the compliance rate is between 40 and 50% on average. And some short-term compliance for therapy, medication therapies especially, are higher, up to 70 or 80%, right? And so when we think about all of us, I think you mentioned diabetes, but only 51% of Americans are treated for high blood pressure, follow the long-term medication therapies. And it's even worse for some of the mental health conditions. When we look at schizophrenia or major depressive disorder. So we're not very good at following directions as patients. And sometimes that's because we just don't always understand the pros and cons of being engaged and doing that. I know I'm guilty sometimes of when I feel better, I stop taking it. If I have an earache, I might use the eardrops until my earache goes away. And so tell us about when we engage patients and they're part of the process, how we can start to, because to me, this data kind of goes back to this is where the burnout comes from. It feels like we're not making an impact. If we
Mhm.
know as a professional, this is what someone should do. So, tell me again of as we think about that partnership we have with our patients, how that not only benefits the patient, but it benefits us as well, right?
Yeah, there's a bigger picture at play here. And as we mentioned, there's autonomy, but there's also just enough accountability to make sure that things are on track. You want to make sure things are aligned. And here's the thing. What is the long-term trajectory if patients are not just compliant, but engaged with their therapy? Well, we have people living longer. We have people more viable in careers. They're not just, senile and sitting on a bench waiting to die. They're living more vibrant lives, which means they're more active contributors to society over a longer period of time. Well, what does that lead to? Well, if we have a more stable workforce, if we have a more reliable workforce, we have people that are robust. Their relationships are richer. The opportunity to work is richer. Society benefits overall as a whole. And this is, very contrary to the fact, and this is a slight tangent, I know, for a healthcare system that seems to only profit when people are sick. And so there's this interesting, conflict here. Dan Heath talks about in his book Upstream, where there was a conflict where they realized, oh, well, if people live longer, then it's going to be more expensive for them to maintain. And they realized very quickly that's the
Oh,
wrong metric to measure by, unfortunately. Yeah, there's a difficult business aspect to healthcare, and that is maybe another episode for another day, Jason. But
I
um,
agree.
yeah, but yeah, I think that's where it needs to start is did we actually zoom out and see the big picture for this and not just focus on, well, what is my business needs or what is my patient's needs? Because yeah, as you said, it's if our patients fail, then we failed. And to take some ownership in the process while still not overcompensating for them, it's a song and dance and a refinement that will be different for every patient. It's an infinite game. You'll always be doing this at the same time to find these challenges interesting and fun and satisfying on a day-to-day basis is really the type of clinician that we need, and to make sure that they are able to free up their time and energy from things like admin. We have lots of technology to automate things now, thankfully, and to allow them to say, okay, hey, yeah. Part of this is we jokingly say in the weight loss space, give them a drug that they don't want to stop taking. We get all sorts of calls in the weight loss space with patients that are banging down our doors. Why hasn't my medication arrived yet? We've never had a problem with follow-ups and being like, hey, it's time for your medication. Do you want it yet? It's like they're like, I haven't received it yet. So
Mhm.
part of this again, that's and they talking to your point about benefits, right? When the patients say, "Hey, this drug makes me better," and they see the tangible benefits of it, yeah, it's a game changer when it comes to managing their therapy as a clinician. Because the irony now is that some patients are overcompensating and they're losing too much weight too quickly, and now we need to tell them to dial it back a little bit. We're saying,
Right.
"Hey, thank you that you were so motivated to take your medication. You might need to." Slow down a little bit to make sure you don't have any
Yeah.
other problems on that end.
One of the things that I was thinking about while you were talking is in the mental health space, some folks that are the ones that are considered difficult to treat or
Mm,
frequent flyers or
mm,
lots of other terminology come from that space where they're not compliant. And sometimes it's the mental health illness is making them challenge being a compliant person. And other times they're just not compliant. And
yeah.
it gets so frustrating because they get themselves on a trajectory where nobody wants to treat them and there'll
Hmm.
be people who don't want to be seen or taken seriously by doctors, and that's really frustrating for the client, and sometimes it's of their own making. There are people, I know myself in my own life, if I try to mentor, coach, help others and they don't do anything you've asked them to do, how likely am I to continue that relationship? I'm not, because I'm like, well, this isn't, they clearly aren't, it's not clicking, we're not matching, so anything I do or say isn't going to connect. And so it's really hard here is to parse apart which part of this is illness based where they don't, or maybe understanding based where they don't have the knowledge that they need to be compliant, or they're just difficult and they don't want to be compliant. And then they're back at your doorstep all the time. I've got family members that are drug seeking and not like in the illegal drug way, but for sure in the prescription way, and think that everything needs a prescription to fix it, everything. And so,
Yeah.
we'll seek the next diagnosis, the next thing, the next pill, the next thing. And it's really
Mm.
making them more sick, but they're not at a space to think about that because they just keep piling on more medications. So one of the things I know that pharmacy does, and we talk about on here, is when they can help. And I don't think we do a good enough job using our pharmacists in their leadership to help clean that stuff up. You guys are the ones that see all the scripts coming in and should have more say on, hey, all these things don't go together. We should stop all this. But I don't know that you're given that leadership of opportunity as pharmacists to be able to say, hey, doc, knock this off. They don't need 15 of these. Do you see that changing? I mean, because that would be such a bottleneck. Everything comes to you as a pharmacist. Why can't you be the one to call the shots and be like, you shouldn't take all this stuff, call your doctor back and go fix this. I mean, that would be a step forward, but I don't see it really happening like that, at least not with the family and folks that I deal with. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that something pharmacy could really do and given
Oh,
that leadership opportunity to like change that for people?
oh, Jason, Renee, I could have a field day with this, and you're gonna need another
Oh,
episode on
good.
this too.
I can't wait. Tell me
Well,
what you think,
so
Jerry.
yeah, well, to shoot from the hip. So the first thing you mentioned about mental health, absolutely. I have a family member who her depression is so prevalent that you can't even get her out of the house. She won't
Yeah,
take any medication.
right.
Like she's already made it up in her mind that she's going to only live like another couple days, and to even get her out of the house, I can't even do that, and that
Yeah.
is extremely, extremely heartbreaking. And that's where for that discussion, sometimes you have to use medications in spite of the patient because at that
Yep.
point you can't motivate them from within. You kind of have to
Oh,
have a system, much like James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits. You fall to the level of your systems, and so thankfully, there's decanoate injections that we only have to be done once a week, right? There's medications that rapid dissolve tablets where they try to cheat it, like they still get it anyway. And so sometimes you have to succeed in spite of yourself, or you have to know what kind of roadblocks to that and then still find a way to overcome them. And thankfully, you're allowed to do that, to be creative without being illegal. And so you have to be very careful with that. Regarding the role of pharmacy, well, I mean, candidly, we shoot ourselves in the foot because there's so many individual interests within the profession. We can't get on a united front to really move forward the profession in
mm,
terms of having a seat at the table is one metaphor where we can say, hey, yeah, this needs to stop, or, this is what we're seeing, and this is the lookout. We recommend this, and that people would actually take us seriously. Because the interesting thing is when I've done, medical trips to third world countries, all the physicians, all the other prescribers are all thankful that there is a pharmacist and running the pharmacy because that's fewer questions for them if we catch a backlog We're able to tell them about it. Hey, we ran out of this medication, stop writing for it, things like that. And contrast that with a paid business model where we basically are like sidekicks. And as long as we don't pull in as much money as someone who's able to submit reimbursements, through the insurance systems, yeah, they're not going to take us seriously. They know that there's an intrinsic value to having pharmacists there, but if it doesn't show up directly on the balance sheet, as long as that system does not change, and there's only so much we can expect or embrace. And then there are some bright spots. Some states are better than others about giving us provider status, assuming that's what these pharmacists want. And from there, though, as long as there's a hierarchical system where pharmacists are not, working at the top of that hierarchy, there's only so much benefit or change that you could expect.
Yeah, that's really
It's
unfortunate.
unfortunate.
It
It
is.
is. I was thinking the
My
same
family
thing.
member that's dealing with that, his friend is the pharmacist. And so there's been multiple times I'm like, please go ask him what he thinks about blank. And actually, that's a trusted person for my family member. And that actually could be helpful because he was like, well, the Reader's Digest said I should take this or do this. I'm like, oh, go talk to your friend at the pharmacy. At least it was somebody he could connect to. But I see your point, though. If it's not funded correctly, I'm sorry, Jason, I was talking over you. So go ahead, Jason.
No, I just, we've worked with some, pharmacy associations in the past, and even in our own state here in Iowa, I don't think a lot of people know that the pharmacists actually have prescribing power.
Mm,
There's within the scope of their practice, there's a lot more that they can do, and so it really hit me, Jerry, when you said about working to the top of your license.
mhm,
That we don't take advantage of the opportunity we have, and we're losing pharmacists faster, especially in rural areas, and that's a critical
mhm,
missing point for healthcare in rural areas. And I think we were misusing pharmacists so badly that now we're really going to start seeing the effects of that in rural area. And it's very unfortunate because the entire system hasn't been functioning in a way that makes sense and utilizes everyone's skills in a way that it really can impact population health. And so I won't get on my whole social determinants of health soapbox right now. But, I think this is just a great opportunity to see how you've taken all these different areas and found the intersection and have a way to talk about it that I think a lot of people can take pause and step back and go, that makes a lot of sense. Why aren't we looking at this differently? Because that's a game changer in a lot of communities when you have limited resources and limited professionals. How can we tie all these concepts together? Because that can be a huge impact for just one person. It can change the trajectory of someone's, disease management. So I don't know, Renee.
Yeah.
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So Jerry, last thing before I go into the self-care policy, but there are going to be people out there that really want to take control of their own health and still struggle because maybe they don't have the doctors, the pharmacists that allow them to do that. So when you're working and you're coaching in that place, how do you help them see who's who? Like which patients are the ones that are going to be the non-compliant and it maybe going to burn you out if you keep on that route versus, hey, there's this other group of people who really are trying to do well in their health and they need your help and support. Have you been able to figure out like the who's who and help that leader decide, which group is going to be a balance of that so that they don't burn out? Have you figured out like how do you know who's who? Because there are people out there like myself. I'd prefer to not go to doctors and just take care of myself, but I need them at some times. And then
Mhm,
I want to go back to me taking care of my health, right? There's lots of people like me like out there. So how do you work with that population that's like, hey, I do want to be owner of it and I don't want my doctor to do it all for me. So how do
mhm.
you help the doctor work with that population?
Yeah, great question. I mean, part of this is just a litmus test like anything else, right? Actions always speak louder than words. And so maybe you just put them on a month pilot and say, okay, I'm going to put a plan for you right now over the next month. And you can tell them very upfront how well you, not comply, but engage with this will determine how much longer you work with me, right?
Yeah.
Because at that point, you just say, hey, look, you can say all the nice things you want. You can kick my tires all you want. And at the same time, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, I'm going to have to refer you to someone else, or I'm going to take another patient who's more motivated to work with me. And it's tough to dismiss patients. It's never fun it's never satisfying. And when I had to fire people along my journey, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I tried to do it better when I was fired, but it's still, you understand now. You're like, nope, I'm so mad. But patients are no different. And at the end of the day, that's also tough. As leaders, you can only solve so many problems. You can only prioritize so many things. And there are some things you're just going to have to let fail. And there are some patients that will, unfortunately, they're gonna have to deal with some rough consequences of their own making until they choose to decide, you know what, this is a wake-up call. I better get motivated and more engaged before something permanent happens. Because I've seen it where diabetics say, oh, this foot infection isn't so bad until it gets infected and then they have to amputate. That happened to a friend of mine. And you don't want the ozone layer, right, to completely go away before we realize, oh, you know what, maybe we should have taken this more seriously. But to your point, it's like when you contract a new employee for 30 days before you even put them on payroll. You just say, hey, you know what? We're just going to give you an opportunity to prove yourself. And because as a leader, sadly, it's almost like any company. You want to take care of your best clients. You want to take care of the most coachable people, the people that can clearly demonstrate an awareness and that make this a priority. And so to navigate these paradoxes of equity where we want everyone to have this accessible, everyone is invited, but few are chosen, right? To use one biblical metaphor for better or worse. But this idea that, hey, at the end of the day, yeah, work with people are going to care about their health as much as you care for them. And that's an ongoing iterative process because there are some people, like you said, hey, I don't need your help anymore, Jerry. I am so thankful for that, right? Instead of these people, these pain clinics that say, oh, if they're not sick, they don't come back and they don't get their pain meds and we don't get to bill insurance. Like there's some really tough incentives out there that speak a different message than what we're trying to do as practitioners to help patients free themselves up from having to depend on the healthcare system. But to answer your question, yes, test them for a month and then see how they do and then evaluate them. Say, hey, nope, move on. Hey, yes, you're in. Or hey, we can kick the can down the road for another month because I see some promise in you and maybe we just need to refine it more. And everyone's going to have a different level of different threshold as to what they want to do next.
Yep. I had a chronic health condition, inflammatory condition back in 2013 or so. And I went to the doc and I said, here's the deal. I'll take your meds for now, but my goal is to get off of them. And I said, and I'm
Hmm.
not going to work with you if that is not your goal, Mr. Doctor.
Hmm.
And doctor said, well, I don't know that you can, but you can try. I've been off of them now for over 5 years and have no issues. And so, but I told him, I'm like, I'm going to fire you if we're not on the same page for the goal, because my goal was to not be on that forever. I had made
Hmm.
some bad life choices that got me to that chronic condition. And my goal was to fix those things, to not be on the chronic
Good.
condition. And I mean, I didn't know for sure if it was going to work, but that was my goal. And I'm like, dude, I don't really want to see you. And I'm like, if you want me to be a chronic patient, that's not going to be me. But I had to actually have those conversations. And so it is nice to hear that you can coach and I'm not going to be the one that burns them out because I don't see the dude. Now I'm on
Hmm.
like a 3-year schedule, I think, because it's too hard to get back in case I have a flare up. So I have to go I don't know. I got to the furthest year out, but I'm like, I really don't know if I have to see you ever, but okay. So, I mean, but it was like, he's like, all right, I'll let you not come back for a year. Okay, now it's 2 years and now I think I'm up to 3. And I'm like, great. But it took arguing with the guy about,
Hmm.
because he's like, yeah, I don't think you can do that. And I'm like, well, I'm going to not see you anymore if you don't think I can. So, it's just kind of funny that it is important. So before we go, everybody, let's talk about the recovering politician policy of the week. So this one's about goal setting. And I had a goal for a quarter recently that I was really working on, and then a healthcare issue kind of got in the way that I didn't know was going to take near as long to recover from that I thought. So it kind of blew the goal out of the water. I wasn't going to get it done by the end of September. So when you get to that point in your life, you have choices. One is quit and just be like, I'm not going to hit the goal, so why even try? Or you can do a reset and be like, okay, if I had 30 more days, since I was kind of off track for about a month due to the issue, if I just give myself 30 more days, I can still hit the goal. And that's what I chose to do. But it really reminded me the need for flexibility in that state, because sometimes we make these goals, we make in our mind these expectations that we set for ourselves that it's not on anybody's calendar in the whole world but your own. And then we make it, well, we don't hit it, then we're just a failure and we didn't do it. And that's not the mentality that we need in life. Sometimes things hit us. We've talked about that all day today. Sometimes the rust hits the field and you have to do something different in order for the goal is to have a great harvest in this case. And so he's going to do other things that are necessary, other strategies to make that goal still be successful, but you got to do extra things. And so when you're thinking about goal setting, it's just really important to know that you can move the goal line sometimes, and sometimes that's all it takes, another 15 days, another 30 days, and you still hit it. Instead of just like, well, I didn't make it this month, so I'm Totally done. So today, everybody, I just want to, we met our friend Jerry Fu, and it was awesome talking to him about just all, I had never thought about this before, thinking about the patient being the least utilized person in the room in a treatment plan. That's amazing. And how you can help them, empower them to be a person that they can take care of themselves with a good life trajectory in a way that doesn't burn out the provider. What an amazing thought that is, and being just a better partner. So thank you so much for coming on today. And before we go, everybody, don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. And if we give you a review, if you give us a review, we have a prize for you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great time. We'll see you next time.